All right, so I got a lot of comments on my previous videos asking if I could kind of go through the process of starting a new book and the outlining and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know how this is gonna go, but I literally am starting a new book today, so I figured I could just kind of keep the video running while I do it, and then see if I can talk about what I'm doing while I'm doing it without interfering with what I'm trying to do too much. So I guess we'll just see how this goes. So I'm gonna pull up my Word document, and then I'm just gonna kind of do what I normally do when I'm trying to start a new book, and do my best to explain what's going on. So I just go into my Google Docs, and then I've done some outlining in the past where I do kind of more formal stuff. Like I'll break the story up into like part one, part two, part three, and part four. And then I think of it as like this is the first 25% of the book, and this is the second 25%. Some math here. 26 through 50. Yeah, do it like that. And then like 51 through 75%, and then 76 through 100. And when I do it like this, I usually think of it in terms. So I'm bringing this up because even if I'm not actually outlining when I'm writing the book, I'm thinking about this kind of thing. And so this is kind of like the introduction where you're showing both characters, and then as far as the romance goes, it's sort of like the meet cute, and it's the part where they're sort of like testing the waters. And then on this part, it's sort of like you're I guess at the end of the first part, I consider that ending of the first 25% when you sort of establish what the book is going to be about. So like establish the stakes is kind of the transition point from the first 25% to the next. And so that might be like if it's gonna be a grumpy boss romance or something, then maybe at 25% she learns the that she's gonna be working for this guy, and you kind of understand, okay, this is the shape of the book going forward. And so then you kind of just have like, I think this is normally where people call it like the fun and games part of the book, where you might have some. For me, I think of like this is where I'm gonna have dates. There's gonna be push and pull, sexual tension. I'm not really gonna worry too much about like them actually being in love. It's more about kind of testing it and showing the reader that there's something there that they want to root for. So make sure that give something for people to root for. You also kind of want to get the aspect of making it so people can root for the characters even from the first page if you can. But this is where you're like you want them to root for the relationship, not just the individual characters. And then usually you want to hint at some kind of tension here too. So this is kind of like the hinted at tension. Like you might bring up an ex that is going to be a problem, or the heroine's father is overbearing and he's got some kind of plans for the heroine that conflict with them getting together. But I usually, for the style I write, this would depend on your style, but for the style I write, I don't usually go too deep into tension and drama. So my stuff is a lot gentler with that sort of angle. So I usually just kind of hint at it here, and then I bring it in later when I need that sort of hiccup moment. Um, so then, like, I guess the point where I know I'm moving out of this phase of the book is when they've sort of, I guess it's like they've both taken. I guess maybe I should say commitment. I don't even know if I spelled that right. Just bear with me. I don't spell. I let the computer do that for me, and it's bothering me. It's not telling me that's right. Okay, I'm gonna assume I spelled that right. So then, like a commitment, for example, would be if she's working for her boss. They've had push and pull all through that part. Maybe they went on a date that they didn't call a date. Like they had to go to a client dinner together, and then at the end of the 50% though, I might have something where it's kind of like she's been wanting to get her own job, and then she gets an opportunity, but she decides to pass it up to stay with him. And so you're kind of like you always want to think of you've got these points where something has changed before you transition to a different tone, but your book should have kind of these little chunks of tone and a chunk of a goal where there's a goal and then that goal kind of shifts or morphs even if it's subtly. And so for me, I guess I kind of think of it as like the commitment or like taking one more lock in kind of step to the relationship. And so then this part is like you're showing how good they can be together. And this is kind of like for the first part of this section, you're going to kind of show them happy together and then make sure the reader knows though that there's some reason that they still can't finish, like there's that one last obstacle in the background, maybe it's big, maybe it's small. And it's kind of like a tease, so this is like the tease section where you're going to show them having that heartfelt conversation and getting all the things that they wanted. And then you bring back the conflict here, and that usually kind of is your cause of maybe a big bad breakup type of thing. And then they call it like the darkest night. So there's going to be some kind of down moment where the the ex came back, she made something up, or she brought up something that a character had been hiding, and then that causes them to have a breakup, or they separate, and then they have to kind of overcome that. And so you show them separate, and now that you've can hopefully convinced everybody to root for their relationship, this is a compelling part of the story because the reader really wants them to get back together, despite their mistakes. And then you have them fighting for love. So whoever kind of was most in the wrong at this part usually is the one who's going to be doing some kind of grand gesture. And so the breakup, I think, is sort of the breakup point, or the maybe you could even call it, because I don't always do a breakup. So like the worst of the tension here would also be maybe a transition. So if it's just that the obstacles have mounted and reached a breaking point where it feels like something's got to give, that could also be your sign to transition here. And so this part is kind of like a grand gesture, fixing the problem, however you want to think of it. And this, to me, this is kind of the easiest part of the book because everything's all set up and there's not really much more choice anymore. It's just you created a bunch of problems and then you're showing the solutions. So he's apologizing to her in a way that she finds compelling, and then they maybe show the bad guy getting justice. Usually readers are frustrated if the more bad you make the bad guy, the more they want to see that payoff of the bad guy getting what they deserve. So don't forget about them. If you had somebody causing mayhem throughout the whole book, make sure that at this part you kind of show a satisfying way that they got punishment. And then bring back perfect. So it's kind of like the part where they were promised. You showed earlier on how good they could be. You want to bring them back to this point too. And then the epilogue is kind of the wrap up moment, obviously. So in the romance world, at least, the epilogue is kind of where you can sort of throw out the rule about avoiding exposition, and you can just sort of tell them everything, wrap it all up, the stuff that maybe wasn't super compelling to write about, like the last 3 years everything's happy and they've been great. You can just kind of say, 3 years later everything was great. But so that's kind of, I practiced when I first started. I used to do a more detailed outline where I had everything kind of in like an Excel document broken down by percentages, and I would kind of try to place the things in the outline as I was planning. But I've done enough stories that this is kind of like roughly what's in my head as I'm outlining. And so a lot of times what I've found is that I don't need to plug something in here, 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 and here, because once I've plugged in even just this part, it almost feels like figuring out all of this is just sort of a downhill effect. Like once you have the meet cute, then I don't really need to know what dates they're going to go on, or what kind of push and pull there's going to be, or what the sexual tension is going to be like, because that's something I can just kind of figure out as I go. Um, the only thing that I do think, if you're not getting it, I usually am more of like a write on the fly type of person. That's my preference. So I like to kind of figure out my basic foundation and then just start going. But the one thing I do recommend if you're gonna sort of pants it, like writing by the seam of your pants, is to figure out, trying to find it on here where I wrote it, hint at conflict. Didn't I write that somewhere? Hint at conflict. Bring back conflict. Maybe I just said it. Oh, hint at tension. Okay. So this part here is, if you're gonna pants it, I think it's probably a good idea to come up with this as well as your introduction at the beginning, because I've kind of burned myself a few times by just starting to write, and then I get here and things are going great, and then I get about halfway through the book and I realize that I've introduced no real tension beyond their internal doubts about the relationship. And it's a lot easier to write a book with some kind of external tension. And when you're writing like 40 books over time, you do realize that you can't just keep using the same formula. So it can't always be the meddling X, but that's usually like the easiest one. Like kidnapping and X's are super easy to kind of bring in and move the story along. So for this new book I'm planning, I'm probably just going to try to come up with this and this before I actually start writing the book, because um, I personally get really bogged down just trying to come up with all this stuff. Like to me, it's really boring to sit there and plan out every little detail. And I also find that when I'm in the act of writing the story, if I know everything that's supposed to happen, one problem is if I'm writing to my outline and keeping up with it, then it's just not as exciting for me because I know what I'm doing already. So it's like just moving through the motions versus kind of figuring it out as I go, which is more fun for me. And then the other problem is that a lot of times I don't stick to the outline. So in the times where I've done really detailed outlines all the way up to the end of the story, I start to veer off before I even really make it out of part one. So that's kind of just my personal thing I've adapted to find works best for me. But before I actually get into trying to plan this book and thinking out loud, the last thing I'll say is that I think it's pretty clear to me that there's just two main types of writers, and some people really struggle outlining, like myself, and then some people really kind of thrive when they're doing it. So just because I'm not doing it, it doesn't mean it's not the best way to do it. So you kind of have to experiment a little bit and see what works for you. So this part, I'm probably going to end up like doxing myself a little bit, but I'm hopefully I don't end up regretting that. But it's what I'm going to do it anyway. Um, so I'm not going to outright say my pen name, but I mean, if anybody puts in work to try to connect the dots, this wouldn't be super hard. So my genre is like rom com right now, and the last book I did was a vampire rom com. So I'm doing a second one that's going to be vampires again and romantic comedy mixed together. So a lot of times I like to come up with the title first before I come up with the story, and then if I can, I like to actually make the cover first too, and even kind of at least think up a vague version of the blurb before I even start. So that's something that I would normally do here, but I don't really want to write out my title and my blurb and start making my cover on video. So I'm gonna just do it a little out of order, and then if I need to tweak later, I can go back and do that. So this would be where I would just kind of brainstorm some title options, and then I might even try to like just wing some blurbs here. I'd probably write out a couple of them, and then I might even go into Photoshop and spend a day just kind of like fiddling with my cover. And then the other advantage to that is it lets me kind of in the back of my mind start thinking about stuff. Like I'm not coming into this having literally not thought at all about what I want the story to be like. It's kind of been, mulling in my mind for the last couple weeks. So some of this is me just getting on paper or the document what I've been thinking about. So I know for my story, I wanted to do something where I have a vampire heroine. So that's kind of like one of my core concept ideas, because in a romance it's pretty standard to do the male being the obvious powerful person in the relationship, like a Navy SEAL. The more the guys are alpha and powerful or whatever, the more that kind of plays into the formula that's satisfying. And I thought it would be kind of fun to have the heroine be a vampire and the human guy to be the hero. So that kind of would give me some interesting things that might be fun or funny. Since I'm doing a rom com, I always try to find little angles that will hopefully give me free humor as I'm going through the book versus having to manufacture it all the time. Um, and so I have to think of how I can do this in a way where it's not going to emasculate the hero. You know, obviously, if I'm doing a vampire, then there's going to be like the supernatural advantages of strength and kind of stuff like that for the heroine. So it's going to be a little bit of a challenge because she could, in the frame of the story, you know, just on paper with what I have right here, there's a power imbalance, and that's going to make it hard for him to seem alpha. So off the top of my head, the most obvious thing would be to make her have a weak personality and him have a strong one. But I don't think that's a good solution because um, romance readers are really strict, and strict's not the right word. They're really picky about the heroine. I mean, I guess they're really picky about any main character, but I found that there's some sort of like red flag things that you just don't want to do with your heroine because my theory is that readers are putting themselves into the heroine, and that's the easiest way for them to enjoy the book is kind of that a lot of them just kind of it's like when I read fantasy, you know, whether you think you're doing it or not, it's kind of fun to put yourself in the shoes of the main character and kind of be there. And the more off-putting the character is, I think the harder it is to disappear into them as a reader. So I always try to think about that specifically with the heroine, that I want them to have at least some element of like everyman. And if I can't do that because I have maybe a different idea that makes them a little more unique, I do like to make sure that I'm not making them somebody that the reader will feel like doesn't deserve the hero. So I don't want her to be so weak in her personality that people are kind of not rooting for her to win and get what she deserves. So I'm gonna just type some things as I'm thinking. Like I could have her be a new vampire because that kind of has the connotation of being, you know, like she's still figuring things out, um, uncertain, and maybe she got like accidentally turned into a vampire, and maybe that gives her powerful enemies. And if she's like new, confused, and in my first book, their sort of relative power was based on their age, so that would kind of help the whole power balance issue because she would be technically like physically powerful, but she would be by circumstance in a situation where she might need the help of somebody competent, even if they're not as physically powerful as her. So that feels like probably a good option. So I'm going to leave that there. And then for my hero, I should probably just put this here. I need to think of ways for him. Probably the main thing is I need to demonstrate that he's competent, and you kind of always want to think about that with a hero in a romance book or really any book. If you want people to feel invested in a character and to like them, it's not so much about making them likable. It's more about showing that they're competent and that they have things that they want to accomplish and giving them kind of there's a word that's not coming to me. You want them to know what they want to do and to be active in seeking it versus being passive and just kind of sitting there and letting things happen. So I always try to think about that, but because I'm kind of messing with the power balance here, I think I might need to go a little overboard on his competence and activity. Um, so for his career, I probably want something that lets him show off those things maybe a little more aggressively. Like going with the whole businessman angle, I think unless his career somehow is related to her problem, it would be hard to say, you know, he's great in the boardroom and that is therefore going to help him solve her problem. I normally don't really do the whole law enforcement thing because I think it's kind of it's not the trendiest topic that readers get sucked into, but I think in this case, if I don't wrap it into the marketing and try to say, hey, this is a police officer book, I think it'll be okay. So, because that's where I'm leaning is like some kind of police, and maybe even like not strictly police, but like security, I guess, which is maybe a little safer. Um, and the witness protection thing is kind of interesting to me. Does it know she's a vampire? So that could be kind of a fun introduction to the story. Is that okay? Let's see. So I'm kind of moving around here as I'm thinking of stuff, but this is more for the plot, I guess. Maybe her accidental turning involves a crime that draws police attention, and that gets her brought in for witness protection, and she ends up in his care. So I'm always trying to think of like the lock in. I think there's another word for that too that I normally think of. It's not coming to me. It's like a whatever. So some way that they're gonna sort of be forced into proximity with each other is really helpful plot wise, because ideally you want to have them feel emotionally repelled almost. Like at first it's most compelling if you put them together and they just want to bounce apart like two opposite sides of magnets. So for me, if I can think of a way at the beginning that they have to be with each other, then I can go a little crazier with the repellent part, which makes it more fun when they eventually get together. So the whole witness protection thing is appealing to me because it would be like, I'm assuming I could put them in the same apartment or something and he has to protect her, and could be comedy stuff. I don't always, sometimes I'm just, I guess for the format of this video, I'm being a little more formal with how I'm typing all this stuff out. So I'm not trying to represent this as exactly how I normally sit here and type stuff out, but I'm just thinking that for something that's kind of funny that I could lean into, I kind of like this idea that it's rough in my head. I'm trying to think of how to word it. She's okay. That's not the right way to word it. It's the dynamic I'm thinking of that feels inherently funny is she's powerful. He doesn't know it. He is confident and cocky about his own capability and thinks she needs protected. Proud of himself for protecting her. So it's not exactly what I'm looking for, but the point that I have in my head is kind of that I can imagine a fun scene or two where it's like, there's some kind of action sequence and she's in danger, or he thinks that she is, and he's off like wrestling and grappling with some guy in the hallway and trying to get the gun from him, and he knocks the guy out, and he doesn't realize in the background she's taking care of three different guys, and when it's all over he kind of comes strutting back in like making sure she's okay, and it's just sort of amusing from a irony standpoint that he doesn't realize that she's that much more capable. And so sometimes I like to have some broad stuff that I think is at least possibly funny. And then sometimes when I get in, like I've had moments where something like that I think of and I'm like, I could probably figure out how to make that scene funny. And then I get into the scene and I write it and I'm like, okay, that was not funny at all. This is just stupid, and I'll have to kind of rewind and fix it. But the more stuff I think of before I even start the story that feels kind of like a funny element, the better. So um, I just kind of wanted to make a note of it because if you don't make a note of what you think can be funny, you may end up driving the story away from those kind of options. And so for me, when I'm writing rom com, I like to make sure I'm keeping track of um, potential comedy. So just kind of reviewing what I have for myself here to see. So, because the other option with her is I don't necessarily have to make her a new vampire who's figuring things out. So that's like option A. And something else that might be worth thinking about is if she was um, old and powerful, but kind of jaded towards love, which is normally more like what I do for a male character. So I don't know if that's getting a little too cute with the role reversal. You know, if I had it like she doesn't normally even think of humans as love interests, they're just food to her, but this one's different, you know, that kind of thing. Um, yeah, I don't know if that's jumping out to me as a good idea as I'm trying to kind of think about it. But I also have some doubts about this new vampire figuring things out and certain thing where I don't I don't know if that would undermine the whole comedy aspect and just make it more like he is the badass who's coming in and saving the day because to me part of the appeal was like it would be a little fun if she is more capable than him but he's still useful, you know, like there's plenty of movies and books where there's one character who's literally a superhero, but there's still side characters that are useful because they're so competent or just, you know, other reasons that they come up with. And I don't know if that's compatible with the romance formula. So that's kind of what I'm struggling with a little here. Um, but I think I'm not going to do this one. I think I can work with the new vampire thing. So for the plot, I want to get a little bit more of an idea of what happens to start the story off and then come up with the tension. And then I think I'll probably just start writing. So, trying to think of how somebody could accidentally be turned into a vampire is a little tricky. Um, in the first book, I kind of set up the world building, I guess, of like, you have to be. What was it? I should probably remember my own rules. If you, oh yeah, that's right. There were a couple ways. It was like if you drink the blood of a vampire and then they drink your blood, that makes you a vampire. Or if you drink the blood of a vampire and then you have sex with them, that because it's a romance thing, whatever, then that makes you a vampire. So maybe instead of it being an accident, it could just be that somebody didn't want her to be turned into a vampire because it's a little implausible for it to be an accident. So I'm trying to think of how that could work. Maybe like her sister, which is a sibling who made her a vampire on purpose to protect her. Okay, maybe her sister was in trouble and her sister had to turn her into a vampire to give her a chance of surviving. Maybe her sister even gets like killed before the events of the book, and then that's kind of like the mystery angle. Like, why did they kill her sister? Why did her sister think she needed to protect herself? Um, I don't normally do much like mystery kinds of stuff though, so that's a little out of my wheelhouse. Kind of like that idea though. Sister, so like sibling turns her to protect her, but doesn't have time. I always kind of I kind of hate this advice, this device, the whole like, there's no time. So I usually try to avoid that sort of thing. So I'm trying to think if there's a different way to do that where it's not something as silly as like, I'm doing all this stuff, but we're walking and I don't have time to talk and explain something to you that I could probably explain in 10 seconds. Because that always irritates me as a reader. Um, it's, it's popular though, because sometimes it's hard to actually think of a good reason that somebody could not explain something. Because usually it's pretty easy to explain something quickly. So if you're going to try to go the route that somebody wanted them to know but didn't have time to explain, there's not a whole lot of logical alternatives. Maybe it'll be easier if I think of what it was that she was trying to explain and couldn't. So, what reason would there be that her sister would need to protect her from other vampires? And then also, would she have known that her sister was a vampire? Okay, let's do this. So I'm like sidetracking a little. Her sister had a love affair with another vampire, and he turned her so they could be together forever. And then this all happened recently. The heroine doesn't know her sister is a vampire. But her new vampire lover guy is it's kind of boring though if it was just that people didn't like him and they just want to kill her. I wonder if there's a more interesting angle. And then I also wonder if I can just not know it yet until I start writing and figure it out later. Because usually if I can do that, I prefer it. If I can just make sure that I've kind of set the framework up for there to be a good reason, and then I can figure out the good reason later. But sometimes it's better if you know the good reason so you don't end up kind of shooting yourself in the foot. Yeah, I think if I don't know the reason, that's probably okay. So for some reason, they maybe they killed her dude, and they are coming for anybody he cared about, which means the heroine is included. Sister decides the only chance of protecting her is to turn her, but the less she knows, the better. That's almost as bad. Doing the whole less you know, the better thing is also kind of a slightly lesser evil version of the I don't have time to explain why, so that's not really sitting well with me either. I guess the other obvious question is, do I need to make it a mystery? Could I just have her sister tell her the truth? And maybe I'll just do that. I really don't like kind of faking tension, and I think I don't have time to explain why, or the less you know, the better is faking tension, and then it's also putting this sort of promise that there's going to be some really satisfying explanation that's unraveling for why these guys are after her. Um, and I think that's also losing track a little bit of what people are looking for in my books, because I've got kind of like a brand, I guess, and I don't think people are coming to my books for tantalizing mystery. They want light entertainment, and then they want to kind of chuckle here and there. So I'm gonna go with just to turn her. So the heroine knows there are bad guys who want her dead. She doesn't have anybody to teach her about being a vampire because her sister got killed. And maybe the crime she witnessed was her sister getting killed. The crime she witnessed was her sister's death. Maybe she was like hiding. She was hiding nearby because her sister sensed the guys coming figure that out later. Um, and that's probably good because if the sister's death is part of why this whole kind of thing kicks off, it makes it more relevant versus me just having to have some weird conversation where she brings it up later. And then also, if there's any kind of angle in the story of investigating the crime, it'll also feel more relevant because it's going to kind of give you information about like whether she's in danger. Um, Summary. So I've kind of rambled in my plot section here. So just basically, I think I want to think of it like he, I'll start with her side of it. She witnesses a crime that gets her put in witness protection. I'm trying to think if I should have. So the obvious question is going to be, she's a vampire now and she knows it, and they're going to come to her to try to get her in witness protection. And it seems like a reasonable question if you were in her position would be, do I even want to get put in witness protection when these people don't know what is coming after me? Like, can the police actually protect you from vampires? And that seems like a reasonable question to ask. So I'm trying to kind of project forward to when I get to that point in the book, if it's going to feel unbelievable for her to just be like, yeah, sure, let's go with this. So I'm thinking the two solutions to that are either that she's so charmed by him that she goes with it, or she's impressed. Like maybe there's some opportunity for me to demonstrate how competent he is, and he helps her through a hiccup that she realizes she wouldn't have made it through without his help. Um, so I think either of those are fine though, so I can kind of leave that as an open-ended option. And then the ongoing tension. So for the relationship tension, I've got some pretty pretty generalized options, because one is that if she cares about him, she won't want to put him in danger. And turning him into a vampire will do that, because it'll mean that the guys who are after her are going to kind of lump him in with her people. And then maybe there's just other, she's like, this isn't the kind of life I would wish on anybody, the obvious vampire tropes. So I don't really need to write all that out because I think that'll be kind of obvious. And then for him, this brings me back to the characters. So I'm kind of gonna pause on my summary plot here and then go back to my characters and see if I can. So like, when you get in this whole part where there's a relationship tension, you kind of have to have like a flaw in the character. And that, at least for me, that's kind of been one of the more easy ways to come up with reasons that they can't be together, is to give them both a flaw. So I haven't done that yet, so I'm going to go back and try to think of a little bit more about them as a person versus just their job and their kind of sketch. So like, and give them a name. I'm horrible with names. I usually just I just throw one down and try to pick a name I haven't picked before. So I'm trying to think of like a police officer-y name. Riggs. So he'll be Riggs. And did I write one? Oh yeah, here she is. And then for her, I want like a vampire-y name. Even though she wasn't a vampire until her sister turned her into one, I feel like she needs to have a name that feels like a bridge between vampire and normal name. So it's like a modern name, because her and her sister weren't vampires. But I don't want her name to be like Becca, because then when she is a vampire, it won't feel fitting. Sylvie? Is that a name? Sylvie. Sylvia is a name, but I don't like that as much. Sylvie. It's always kind of a plus if there's like a pet name the hero can make out of their name. There's not really one here. Syl. That looks awkward. Syl. I don't know. I don't care too much about names, so I'm gonna go with that for now. And if it bothers me later, I can do a find and replace. Um, okay, so before Sylvie gets turned into a vampire, I want to think of like what her deal was. So she's like, I'll put her mid 20s. I'm gonna do. Let's see. So if I want her to be kind of, I don't want her to be stupid, but I don't want her to be such a badass that she doesn't need any help. So being mid 20s kind of helps with that, just in general. I'm trying to think if I want her to be like college educated or if that even matters or makes a difference. She probably needs to be interested in something, so the college education could kind of give me something to kind of point her towards and then help me circle her with some more realistic information. Um, it would be interesting actually. Maybe, maybe instead of strictly being turned to protect her from the other vampires, maybe she was like sick her whole life, like some kind of immune disorder that made her stay home a lot more. And part of the reason her sister turned her was to cure her. That's kind of cool. I don't know if that really. Sometimes it's like I don't know if that actually changes anything in the story though. It'd just be like a little factoid to throw out there, and maybe justify her sister turning her more because without that, it kind of is a little presumptuous of somebody to assume that it's cool to turn you into a vampire. Um, but that would, I guess, it would flavor her past more, so it would help present her as somebody maybe who needs a little more help, but is also kind of like just now coming into capability, which is kind of cool. Yeah, I like that. So, formerly sick, and maybe. So, I want her to have something that she cares about. Like, you kind of. When you've written a bunch of characters, it's easy to just give them like a job and then that's their personality, but it's always if you can best to try to really think of them as a real person. And any real person you meet, if you ask them, what do you want out of life, they have an answer. And so I think that's one of the easiest things to kind of base a person around is like what do they want. And so I'm trying to think of what she wants. And if you're sick your whole life, it seems like it'd be natural to want maybe like adventure, or maybe it'd be kind of empath like you could empathize with somebody who's been sick their whole life and thought that they weren't going to have a good life, like a marriage and a family and all the kind of stuff that normal people get to have because they weren't supposed to be able to kind of be out there and meet people. Um, and so that could play in with the story. So wanted a normal. I know that sounds kind of boring, but if she wanted a normal life and didn't think she'd ever have it, then all this happening is kind of like a tease for her because she's got. I mean, being a vampire wouldn't be a normal life, but it would let you have more of a normal life than being like chronically ill, and so it's a different life, but it's a type of normal that she could have. But she wouldn't be able to have it until this obstacle was done with. So these people who want her dead are kind of like, she's finally got a taste of possibly having a normal life, which I can kind of show in the 25 to 50% part of the book, where maybe there's some moments in between the chaos where they're getting a taste of good stuff, and she really is. learning that she can want this, but then they've got to overcome the obstacle for her to reach her goal. And I like that because that makes you root for her. Okay, so she's all that for my three little short sentences, but she wanted a normal life, and then what's her flaw? Maybe her flaw is I'm trying to keep going back to this because to me this is like your whole identity if you're, that's you. And when I think of somebody who's sick all the time, obviously there's a bunch of flaws. You could be kind of a pain in the ass, but that's not a flaw you want to give your heroine. So I'm trying to think of like it's almost like when someone asks you on an interview, what's your biggest flaw, and you say people say I work too hard. I I'm kind of going at it from that angle. Like I want her to have a flaw that is legitimate, but not unappealing. It's like cheating. I'm trying to give her something. It's not technically a flaw, but it is for plot purposes. So the first one that comes into my head is that she doesn't accept help easily. But I don't know if that's really, that almost feels like it might fight too much against the plot that I'm trying to force her into of going into witness protection. Because if she doesn't accept help, then it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for her to jump right into this whole, okay, fine, you can protect me, and her sister turning her into a vampire. Like, that's kind of, it feels like the plot I'm writing already doesn't fit that, or that I would be front loading all the growth where it happened off camera and then it's kind of irrelevant anyway. So I'm trying to think if there's another flaw that fits well with the sickness thing. And the other challenge there is if she was still sick, I could do something like she's afraid people will leave her because she's sick, or that she's afraid people won't love her because she's sick, or that they're gonna, they'll never be interested in her because she's sick. But all of those rely on her still being sick, which she won't be. And I could maybe see a version where you sort of transform her insecurities about being sick to being a vampire so that all her fears of how people will view her for being sick now are how people will view her for being a vampire, which could work. She was always worried that if she met a guy, he wasn't going to be interested because he learned that she had this, immune disorder that meant that she was always going to be hospitalized and stuck inside and couldn't do normal things. So she felt like she had to hide it or just not interact in the first place. And now she's got a new thing. And she's probably afraid if she meets a guy and tells him that she's a vampire, it's going to have the same effect. I think I like that. Okay, so she's afraid of telling people she's sick because of how they'll view her react. And now that transferred to the vampire stuff. Okay, so I've got kind of like enough, probably, for my style here. So for Riggs, we'll make him like mid 30s, partly because having him be older than her is going to be like a default um, thing that will help it not seem like there's a power imbalance. I don't think I want to go like 40 because then it almost, I guess that wouldn't really matter. I'm in my 30s, so I think it's easier for me to write about people around my age versus trying to write about a 45-year-old or something. It's not that I haven't done it, but I usually just, if there's not a good reason to write outside my comfort zone, then I'm probably not going to do it just for the sake of doing it. So I'm going to make him mid 30s. And if he's in witness protection, I don't actually know how that works. So that might be something I have to Google a little bit about. But I kind of like the idea of him being like a some sort of former badass. Like he's obviously still a badass. It's a romance book, but like maybe he was on some of the police team or something, or like military maybe. And then he had like he blew something up that he wasn't supposed to and got put on desk duty as punishment. And so I think that's kind of a fun, just it's not the most unique character profile, but like the former badass who's like hunched over a desk, bulging muscles, and he's all grizzled and scarred, but he's working for some like dork named Paul, who's asking him about memos or whatever. Um, and I think for his personality, I want him to be kind of like I. I'm not. I don't think making a wide variety of personalities for my rom coms is one of my strengths. So I feel like I always kind of go on some spectrum of I've got the real grizzled, hard, grumpy guy, or I've got the kind of like goofy, wild guy. And I think it would be more fun to make him kind of the goofy, wild guy, like the rogue. I guess is a better way to put it. Like the not goofy in a way that you don't take him seriously, but kind of like witty and fun, I guess. And I think that feels like his environment there as the former badass in the desk job would fit. But I do need to figure out if there's like a single job in witness protection where you're processing paperwork and then you're also the person who's looking out for the um, protectees. Because it could be like he gets assigned to her case, and then at some point he ends up taking more. I kind of like this. So this is maybe a little more plot than character, but I don't really. It's like when I was in school, I never actually went back and read my notes. It was more like writing them down just helped me remember, and then I just kind of turned on forward. So bear with me, but um, maybe for some reason he can't. I'll figure this out in a little bit. He can't lose his job, but he isn't supposed to be her bodyguard, basically. And somehow it turns into that. Like, I'm guessing the guy who does the paperwork also isn't the guy who's sitting around and guarding the people in witness protection. So it could be kind of a good tension point to have it like maybe this is his last chance, and he's got to prove that he can sit at a desk and not blow something up for a month if he wants to get his old job back, which he's passionate about. And for some reason, he gets sucked into a conflict with this girl and doesn't feel like he can trust the process to keep her safe, and he has to keep getting involved. But he's kind of having to do that off the books, and hoping he's not getting caught. And so there'd be some tension there of like, I can't keep helping you like this because I'm going to lose my job, and I can't lose my job, or this is my last chance, or I can't keep blowing things up for you. Um, so I kind of like that. I don't know if I have a great grasp of the details of how that would work yet. But I need what he wants. He wants, and I always kind of try to decide if they're in that relationship point where have they been in a bunch of relationships and they're jaded? Are they relatively unexperienced? And usually for the guy, I don't go that route. I usually go for the guy. It's easier to do like he's been in a million relationships, but they never really mattered to him, and he just kind of used them for the sex. And now suddenly this girl's different, and he's actually kind of open to feeling for once. Or I go the route where he was open once with somebody, but he got burned, and now he's afraid to kind of be like that again. And so I'm just trying to decide what feels like it would fit best here. Should he be former playboy who just happens to find a girl that he cares about? Or maybe he never thought he was going to care about women? I'm not like that, but he never thought that he was going to be the type to want to settle down or anything like that. Um, or if I, this might be a little too angsty for a rom com, but like if he had some woman in the past that he was supposed to protect and something happened to her and he's always blamed himself and swore that he wouldn't put himself in that position again, that might be a little too dark, I guess. I know it's not super dark, but for rom com, I like to try to keep it light so that people can just kind of enjoy it and not feel stressed about the book. Um, Trying to think of a flaw. And then I guess it doesn't have to be based on former relationships either. So I mean, his flaw could be that he blows stuff up, like to not literally, but also literally, just in like that he can't stop himself from going too crazy. That's, I don't know, that's not great either because then that's, I really want a flaw for him where it feels like it's kind of somehow linked to the relationship. Hmm. Well, I feel like I've gotten everything I need except his flaw, and it's just kind of not popping into my head. And I don't want to start writing until I have that because if I don't have his flaw and then I come up with it later, um, two things can happen. One is if I start writing without thinking of what his flaw is and what he really wants, then I'm not going to kind of like inject that into him from the beginning. And I'll either think of something good later and then have to change what I wrote to reflect that, or I'll tell myself that I wrote it enough that it didn't matter. But I think those kinds of things are really important to actually making the character real. So I don't really want to start writing until I have that hammered down for him. I want to, but I shouldn't. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just kind of pause and it's probably, yeah, probably go eat lunch, and then I'll come back and I'll probably, hopefully, I'll have like kind of thought of something while I'm eating, and then when I come back, I'll finish kind of this part here. I'm pointing, like you can see my what I'm pointing at. Um, so I'll probably finish this part here with him, and then I may just jump in and start writing, and I'll make like a second video after lunch, showing myself doing that part, and hopefully writing a couple thousand words of the beginning of the story. And I don't think I'm gonna record myself writing the entire story, kind of I guess for obvious reasons, but I'm hoping there's not too much harm in showing myself right at the beginning of a story because if somebody really wanted to copy me, they'd have to write a pretty good story after the beginning. You know, it's not like the first 3 pages of a story are all you need to do what I do. So hopefully that's not something that's going to come back and burn me. But it's been helpful for me because my attention span is usually pretty short. So like if I was doing all this and I wasn't recording myself, I probably would have got distracted a lot more often. So I'm going to kind of justify the minor risk of showing this to like 50 people by saying that it's helping me be more productive. So anyway, I'm going to go eat lunch and then I'll come back and do, I guess, like a part two of this video. So thanks for watching.